Hi you guys, welcome to our last week of art together. I am super excited that you're here and I'm super excited for this project. I think it's going to be really cool. All right, so what we're actually doing is we are going to be doing some sculpting this week. So a lot of people probably don't have clay at home. Some people might have some Model Magic or something, but you probably don't have clay like we would use at school in class, right? So what we're actually going to do is I'm going to show you how to make clay at home. It's super easy and you probably already have all the ingredients. And then I'm going to show you some really interesting techniques to make a flower sculpture. So we're going to use two different sculpting techniques. One is using a mold where that would actually make our flower kind of stand up and have a curved shape. And then there's another technique where you would just be putting different slabs of clay together down flat to make your flower sculpture. And so you can choose whichever one you want. You could even try both this week. In our second video, I'm going to show you how to paint and glaze your clay. So that will be after it's totally dry, and your clay might take a little while. So if you have to go back to the second video after a week or two after your clay is totally dry, then that's totally fine as well. All right, so let's get started. I'm super excited to show you guys this stuff. Okay, so the first step I'm going to do to actually start my sculpture is to make the clay, because a lot of people don't have clay at home. It's something that's kind of expensive. You can actually make clay yourself using some salt, water, and some flour. So we are going to use these three ingredients to make something called salt dough clay, which we are going to use to make our sculpture. I also have a measuring cup for my ingredients. I have a small plastic bowl. You can use any bowl, just as long as it's kind of like small. I would say maybe like the size of your hand is fine. This is what we're going to be using as our mold for our sculpture, so I'm going to put it to the side. And then a bigger bowl. This is actually a really big bowl, but I'm going to use this bowl to mix my ingredients together. So to make my clay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a ratio of 1 part water. So I'm going to use 1 cup of water, 2 parts salt. So I'm going to use 2 cups of salt, and 2 parts flour. So I'm going to use 2 cups of flour, and I'm going to mix it together in my bowl. So now I have all of my clay ingredients together in my bowl. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my fingers and my hands, and I'm actually going to start kneading the clay. That means I'm going to start kind of like squishing it all together until it makes more of like a solid mixture, which will be my clay. If while I'm doing that I think I need a little more water, then I can just splash a little bit of water in. You could see when I put my ingredients in the bowl, I wasn't measuring super carefully, so you might need to add a little bit more of one thing or another while you knead it. Okay, so now I have kneaded my clay together, and it is one big slab of clay. All right, it might look like maybe like dough, right? Because it is very similar to a dough that maybe you would use to make bread or something like that. But I don't really recommend eating this because it probably tastes really gross and salty. All right, so what I do before I start working with my clay is I divide it into pieces, and that helps me kind of gauge how much clay I'm using and how much I have left. So I'm just gonna kind of like split it into thirds and roll it into these little balls so that I can see how much clay I'm using and how much I'll have left for my project. And then I'm going to wash my hands before I start sculpting. So I have my clay all split up, and now I am going to use my small bowl as my mold. So like I said, we are going to be sculpting a flower. All right, the mold is going to help the pieces of our clay that are our flower actually be propped up, so it will look really cool and three-dimensional. If you are using a bowl that you maybe don't want to get super dirty, then you can lay maybe a little bit of plastic wrap or aluminum foil inside of your bowl, and then just use that as your mold. But this is just a little plastic bowl that I don't really mind if it gets dirty with any kind of clay. Okay, so I'm gonna take some parts of my first ball of clay, and I'm just going to take off a little bit at a time and press it into kind of like these flat oval shapes. Right, so these are going to be my flower petals, and I'm going to start laying these all along the inside of my bowl. Right, so let's see, I'm gonna make one that goes on the bottom too. So make one for the bottom, and I'm gonna make all of those oval shapes, right, by pressing my clay together, kind of smoothing out any bumps that I have, and then laying it right inside. And I'm gonna kind of squish them together as they touch. Okay, so you can see how I'm laying my little oval shapes down. I'm gonna squish them together where they touch. And I'm just gonna keep doing that all the way around the inside of my bowl. Okay, so you can see I did the whole inside of my bowl, and you can maybe even imagine how it's starting to look a little bit more like a flower, right? So I'm gonna do the same thing again. I'm gonna put another little piece of clay in the bottom, and I'm gonna add some more petals using the same shape, maybe just a little bit smaller along the inside, all right? But I do have to be careful. I've already used almost half of my clay, so I have to make sure I'm not ripping off too many really big pieces. All right, so I'm gonna put another piece in the middle. And then I'm gonna keep going with my petals. I'm gonna keep ripping off little pieces of clay, kind of rolling them or squishing them into maybe more of a triangle now I'll start doing. And I'm gonna lay them inside of where I've already put my petals. So I'm layering them around. All right, so I'm just about done with my flower. What I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna go back to some of these petals, and I'm gonna kind of make them a little bit more pointy because they need to stick up a little bit more, I think. So I'm just gonna go back and I'm gonna touch up some of my petals that I have already put down in my mold. And I'm gonna let kind of like my fingers pull them upwards a little bit. And I'm gonna also go through and I'm gonna smooth any kind of like bumps or little cracks that maybe I see. All right, so the last little part is I'm gonna add the center of my flower. So I'm just gonna break off a little bit more clay, and I'm gonna kind of roll it and flatten it out to make a circular shape. Right, that I'm going to fit right here in the middle of my flower, and I'm gonna squish it down as well as I can so that way I know when it dries the clay is all really sticking together. All right, then what you can do is you can take some kind of tool. You can use something maybe with like a sharp edge or a sharp point, like maybe a pencil or a pen might get ink on your clay, but a pencil, or I'm going to use a fork actually, so you could use a fork, and I'm just going to add some texture to my sculpture. So I'm going to add just some of these details, maybe that I want some dots in the middle of my flower. All right, I'm going to add like maybe some lines to my flower petals, kind of make it look a little bit more, I guess, realistic, right? Adding some of those details in.
Okay, perfect. And what about that, like, why was that such a success?
Now I'm basically done. The last step that I need to do is wait for this to dry, and that might actually take a long time because if you look, there's a lot of clay in this bowl. You can feel it'll probably actually feel a little heavy. So I'm gonna let this dry. It's definitely gonna need to dry overnight. It actually is probably gonna need a few days to totally dry. When it is done drying, I'm gonna show you how to carefully take it out of the mold, right? But we wanna let it dry like this so that our flower keeps that nice rounded shape. If you have extra clay, then you can just go ahead and maybe make another one or make something else out of your clay or your salt dough clay. Or you can put it in a Ziploc baggie, put it in the refrigerator, and it will keep for you for probably a few days. So you can even go back and play with it later. If you don't have a little bowl that you can mold your sculpture inside of, then I'm gonna show you how to just do it flat. So if you have like a little plate or something, that's probably easiest. If you just want to do it on a piece of foil, that's fine too. I'm going to put it on a plate because it's going to be a little bit easier to move. Okay, so I'm basically going to make my flower the same way I did within my bowl mold, but now I'm just going to lay it flat instead of curving it. So I'm going to rip off small pieces of my clay. Let's see, and I'm gonna do this one a little different. I'm gonna make these petals a little bit skinnier, okay? So I'm just going to start laying down some petals around the outside of where my flower is going to be. Okay, and make sure that everything is smooth. If they're not touching right now, that is a-okay. All right. I'm just gonna start going around and laying down these petal shapes of my flower. All right, and then once I have my petals that are laid out around the edges, I'm going to do the same thing I did before, and I'm just gonna kind of overlap. I'm gonna make smaller petals now. And I'm just going to kind of lay these on top and make sure I'm squishing them down really good so that my clay is attached and it dries together. All right, so I'm just gonna keep laying them on top so they're overlapping. And I'm just gonna keep doing that all the way around, same as before. All right, so now I have my second layer of petals laid down. I want to double check everything is squished together in the middle really, really well. And then I'm gonna take the center of my flower. I'm just gonna kind of roll it into a circle shape and squish it into a circle shape like I did before. And lay it down and press it as firm as I can so that it is attached to all of those petals. And then I'm going to take my texture tool again, right, like my fork, and I'm just going to add some detail and texture on my flower. Now I'm done with my other flower. So yours can be flat or it can be curved depending on how you want to lay it down in a mold or just on a plate. I'm gonna let this dry totally. Again, this is gonna need a few days to dry for sure. So I'm gonna let it dry and then I'll come back and show you guys how we can paint it.